Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for our witnesses here today. I want to follow up first question, follow up on some of the discussion I heard with Senator Fisher related to the agricultural sector. And so my question is to you, Mr. Merkel. I'm certainly glad the FAA has established a drone advisory committee to better inform agency policies. And as you're well aware, 3 out of 4 American farmers are now using UAS. I'm working on some legislation to make sure that on that advisory panel that we are hearing directly from the agricultural industry as well as forestry and other areas. Would you support adding members to the Drone Advisory Committee from rural America, particularly agricultural and forestry?
In the composition of the Drone Advisory Committee, we support having a broad range of users and manufacturers, operators. It's really up to the Congress and the Secretary how that's composed, but we do support a broad representation. We have a very rich representation from state, local, and particularly public safety right now.
Right. So I gather from your testimony you would be supportive of making sure there's adequate rural representation on that board if Congress decides.
We definitely support a very broad range of all the users to make sure everyone's at the table and all the voices are heard.
Great. Thank you. General Monteith, questions for you. As we've talked about the increase of launches as we continue to go put more vehicles into space, my question for you is there sufficient federal support for commercial space launch facilities? So, for example, is the FAA looking at how the demand for launches is expanding and consider whether or not we have adequate facilities around the country to launch the increased traffic that we're seeing?
Thank you, Senator Peters, for your question. I believe we do. We have, within my office, we license not only launches and reentries, we also license spaceports in the United States. We currently have 12 licensed spaceports, 4 that are launching rockets at this time. And recently, we have stood up an Office of Spaceports so that we can better consolidate our efforts within my office to ensure that we are working with the appropriate stakeholders that currently exist, and also to ensure that we have streamlined processes to evaluate and license prospective spaceport applicants.
So, and that's my next question. The Michigan Launch Alliance is looking at siting a launch facility for polar orbits in northern Michigan. It would also launch over some restricted airspace, which would, from a safety perspective, would make a lot of sense and get into those polar orbits. What support does the FAA offer to a spaceport activity like we're seeing standing up in Michigan?
So, sir, interestingly, I'm going up there in a couple of months to speak at an event and directly talk to the folks who are proposing this. But within my office, we offer what we call pre-application discussions. So we work with potential spaceport applicants to help them navigate through the system and help them understand what will be required for us to effectively evaluate a license.
Very good. In my remaining time, just a quick question for you, General Monteith. As we're all well aware, 50 years ago, 2 Americans made a giant leap for mankind and humankind when they landed on the moon. And I think if you're looking at numerous public and private missions that are now being planned to go back to the moon, it's a very exciting time for space exploration. But I also believe it's probably important that we protect and preserve the honor of that Apollo 11 landing site. I know there are some NASA recommendations to preserve that site as additional missions go to the moon. But would you support a codification through legislation to protect the Apollo 11 landing site for future generations?
Sir, I think it's important that we protect all of our historical sites, whether it's on the moon or it's here on Earth. Things like the Apollo moon landing, the first only occurs once.
Right.
And I think it's critical that as around the globe, that we understand that and we preserve those types of unique locations.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate your testimony.